Happy Thursday, everyone, and welcome to episode 11 of the Podcast of Surprise. Today, super excited to be here with you to discuss The Eternal Flame with Michal and Aziz from the Sword of Destiny. This is our first podcast of 2021. Super excited to be here, like I said, and we're here to chat about some Witcher goodness. Of course, as you can see, I'm Telekyle Latorte, Lemmy Aziz, and Novi Chal. As always, we try to do a play on words with our names. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce my co-host, Michal and Aziz. Michal, what's up? How you doing?
I'm good. Super snowed in, but otherwise good.
Is that how New York is right now?
Yeah. We got like 18 inches to 2 feet of snow on Sunday and Monday. So it's I haven't seen much grass recently.
And of course, we're recording this on Audacity for ourselves, but
I forgot to start mine.
So that was kind of a funny segue for my members here because I just turned mine on too. So this will be a fun blooper episode to start. But anyways, Aziz, how are you doing, man?
I'm great. How are you guys? How's everybody out there? Yeah, we're it's like Kyle said, it's our first one of 2021, and it's a really funny story, so I think we'll have a good time today.
I'll just give ourselves a round of applause for that. I really should be doing shame bell, though. Anyways, we won't do too much the soundboard. So for those of you who do know what the Podcast of Surprise is, we have two versions of the podcast. We do it on Thursdays, usually once a month, where we do it live like this. We have a fun discussion where we talk with each other, and we also have a downloadable version of the podcast, which you can find on Anchor FM. You can find our cool ticker from Ellen down there at the bottom. It has the link, or in the description of the video, you can find the links to all of our episodes on Anchor. Michal's doing her job by pointing at the ticker. She's the last one. She's the last one to join the call, so she gets to do the hard work while she's at the bottom.
My point. I'm just pointing at her. So
is that a Dance with Dragons over there, Michal?
It is Dance with Dragons. And I have the Witcher books behind me, and
you can see Aziz has his Witcher map. I have some Blaze manga art. But yeah, today's going to be a super fun episode, everyone. Like I said, we want to support our supporters on Anchor. I believe we've got 8 so far, Aziz. Would you like to name them?
I sure would. We got Maura, Andrew, Ryan, Sam, James, Elsie, Amy, and Barry. Thanks, y'all. Much appreciated. We'll keep them coming.
Yeah, and of course, if you do want to support the podcast, you don't have to. $1, $5, and $10. There's a support button right on Anchor if you would like to support us there. Donate in the live chat if you would like to get your questions featured, or you can hit that join button. But regardless, we appreciate you being here. That's enough support for us. We like that you're here enjoying the podcast.
Yeah.
But Michal, shall we start off with a quote?
yeah. I'm not going to sing, but I will recite. Spring will return, on the road the rain will fall, hearts will be warmed by the heat of the sun. It must be thus, for fire still smoulders in us all, an eternal fire, hope for each one.
Geralt the Witcher hears yelling and cursing and crashing. He has enhanced hearing, enough so that he can not only name the crashing item as a jar of preserve, but he's even able to discern the type of fruit contained within by how it sounds while spilling without. Though we doubt anyone else in the area could identify cherry splatter by sound alone, the commotion that draws his attention is the sort that even a near-deaf person would not miss. A woman on a balcony is yelling at a man on the street who turns out to be Dandelion. The woman, Vespula, is also throwing things at him, and the variety of missiles is matched only by the variety of her curses. Following the cherry preserve comes a flower pot, a tin cup, then some rags, to use her terminology.
These aren't mine, Dandelion said in astonishment, taking a pair of men's trousers with odd-coloured legs from the ground. I've never had trousers like these in my life.
Then a copper cauldron of at least 2.5 gallons, a measurement whose precision is, in hindsight, a bit of foreshadowing, along with the seeming randomness of the hurled missiles. Indeed, a major portion of this story is dedicated to seemingly worthless items turning a huge profit, because most anything is of value to someone. More importantly, perhaps, that lesson is applied in this story to living beings. Additionally, Vespula won't be the only one to hurl insults, so that's a bit of setup as well, though she is the only one to hurl mystery trousers. One might wonder why Dandelion continues to linger in range of the insults, and especially the bombardment, but the answer comes when his loot is the next item to plummet. He manages to catch it, signaling that it's time to move on. Off they go. Now, one might think Vespula's minor role in the story is over, but one would be wrong. That, despite how easy it is to lose oneself in the crowds where they are. And where are they?
Here in Novigrad, the capital of the world, the center and cradle of culture, here a cultured man can live life to the full.
He mentions the mint, the seaport, 4 watermills, the slipper manufactory, 8 banks, 19 pawnbrokers, temples in a quantity he can't recall, it's also 19, and 35 taverns, one of which Dandelion suggests they head to straight away. Geralt's expertise in fruit splatter noises was gained during his time with Yennefer, which is noted to be in the past tense, and then confirmed when Dandelion inquires,
Ah, Geralt, I forgot to ask, how is it with you and Yennefer?
It isn't.
I understand.
No, you bloody don't. Is it far to the tavern?
When inside a tavern, Dandelion becomes something like the sort of monster Geralt is often paid to get rid of. And indeed, it seems the fees the Witcher receives are light compared to the favors Dandelion seems to demand from others simply for having been unfortunate enough to find themselves in his presence. Halflings are better than most at going unnoticed, but here in the Spearblade Inn, there's one, and he's the only customer since, as the proprietor informs them, it's too early for normal folk to have started drinking. His name is Dainty Bibervelt, and since the two know each other, he becomes the target of Dandelion's mooching. Dainty seems wary, though such could be expected from a man who knows Dandelion's tendencies within a tavern. Dainty is quickly given cause to call Dandelion an ass, and Geralt agrees, telling Dandelion to stop it. Despite Geralt taking his side, Dainty's wariness seems mostly reserved for the Witcher himself. It's not long before he claims he must be going, but it seems he lingered just a bit too long.
The door to the chamber opened with a bang, and in rushed Dainty Bibervelt. Oh, ye gods! Dandelion yelled. The halfling stood in the doorway the halfling standing in the doorway in no way differed from the halfling sitting at the table, if one were to disregard the fact that the one at the table was clean, and the one in the doorway was dirty, dishevelled, and haggard.
Dirty Dainty immediately begins cursing at Clean Dainty in a manner well commensurate with Vespula. Clean Dainty tries to escape, and to assist himself grows much longer legs. As startling as that sounds, the Witcher has seen far stranger, and seems to have already identified that this creature is a mimic, or as he prefers, a Doppler. After a quick scuffle, he reveals that his name is Tellico Lungravink Letort, aka Penstock, doo-doo to his close friends. An explanation is warranted, and we learn that the Doppler took the place of the halfling on the road after knocking him out. Dainty had been leading his stock to market, which Tellico took as well, of course. Even Dainty's employees had no idea about the switch. During the explanations, the Doppler seizes an opportunity and escapes, again in the form of Dainty Bibervelt. They had not wanted to involve any authorities, as real Dainty knew they'd be likely to seize most of his property in the process of doing justice. Yet the authorities involved themselves anyway by presenting the now broke halfling with a tax bill for the profits the Doppler made by selling his stuff. Worse, the innkeeper's interests do not align with that of the halfling, and he goes to the highest authority of all and tells the whole story, dainties and everything. Soon enough, the Novigrad Secret Service, a religious order, has accosted Geralt, Dandy, and Dainty and wished to speak to them about this Doppler business. Or rather, they don't want them to speak about this Doppler business to anyone. The encounter goes almost backwards, in a good way. The leader of the group himself is there, named Chappelle, a feared and highly dangerous man who apparently will use almost all means necessary to get what he wants. Something seems off about him, though. Rumors hold that he was in very poor health, but there's no sign of it here. He informs them that the innkeep is in prison.
Whoever says that he saw a vexling at the spear blade a stone's throw from the chief altar of the eternal fire is a blasphemous heretic, and will have to retract his claim. Should he not want to, he shall be assisted by the power and means which, trust me, I keep close at hand in the dungeons.
It's common enough for the interests of the most powerful to trample the interests of, well, everyone else. This is one of those times when the trampled interests were a threat to our protagonists, and thus the greater powers effectively did them a great favor. Furthermore, Geralt is pulled aside and quizzed about his intentions. It's a familiar enough refrain. The man asks him if he'd take a contract to kill dopplers. Geralt refuses on the same grounds he always does, that he won't kill intelligent species, but also he doesn't work in crowded places where others could get hurt. Though Chappelle doesn't appear happy at the refusal, it's an act. It's exactly what he wanted to hear. Geralt's code of honor has put him in danger many times, but this time it may have saved his life. But Dainty's problems are not over. He has the tax bill to deal with, and fresh trouble arises as soon as Chappelle and his men leave. A man named Muskrat approaches, astonished that Chappelle hadn't hauled them off. How did Dainty know about the levolution, he calls it, in Povis, and to invest dyes that match the new regime's colors? Of course, by now we know that it was the Doppler who did this, and now Dainty does too. But Muskrat doesn't, and won't, given the powerful being that made it clear moments ago that one does not speak of things that may blaspheme the eternal flame. It might seem hopeless, the idea that they could find a shapeshifter in a city of 30,000, but Dainty comes to an important realization that the Doppler must be using his bank accounts and/or relationships. Off they go. Indeed, through conversations with the banker, it seems false Dainty has been there quite recently, making more deals. The banker tries to maintain his demeanor. After all, even bankers try to avoid insulting their customers, but he's very confused over how very confused real Dainty is. To the banker, named Vivaldi, Dainty is not only making highly questionable investments, but he's quickly forgetting said transactions within the hour. That is unsettling. Then, to heighten the interest, a message arrives from Dainty. Vivaldi confronts the situation.
One Vivaldi. That's a name.
Yes. That's a hard one. I probably can't even do it.
One Biberveld orders us to sell, and another Biberveld orders us to wait. An interesting situation. What do we do, Dainty? Do you set about explaining at once, or do we wait until a third Biberveld orders us to load the bark onto galleys and ship it to the land of the Cynocephali? Eh?
Dainty, as the customer, is able to defray an explanation for the nonce, and instead he uses that very same leverage to ask for a full accounting of his own recent actions. Through this, he learns that he has not only paid the tax, but has considerable other profits and investments still in play. It turns out the questionable investments were actually quite brilliant and perfectly timed. He's not happy, though, because he's still worried about Chappelle. Excuse me. Vivaldi, not given any answers, ventures that the intelligence service doesn't like the idea of someone learning about such a major political event before them, and that Dandelion's access to courts and the nobility might be seen as the source. That perfect timing is suspicious, and Dainty's friends are implicated. They deny this, but Vivaldi says it doesn't matter if he believes them. What matters is what Chappelle believes. Or rather, what Chappelle will do, despite what he believes. And their story is suspicious. But something is suspicious about Chappelle, too, says the banker. He has changed in a good way.
I swear he is not the same Chappelle. He seems to become courteous, rational, composed, and somehow honest.
Dainty flat out calls this impossible. But the banker is clearly no fool. Chappelle also wishes to expand on the Eternal Fire, building altars around the city with micro-eternal fires of their own in honor of the true one at the heart of the city. As they are discussing this, Doppler Dainty is ahead of the game on this as well, buying or having already bought up huge amounts of pots, oil, wax, and twine, the exact things you'd need to make many homage-sized eternal fires. At this point, none of them have completely figured out what the Doppler is doing, but Dainty is, though perhaps not at the level of his imposter, a smart enough businessman. His concern over Chappelle notwithstanding, he realizes that he might as well let the Doppler continue making him money. But he also wants to confront his copy and discovers his general location, the Western Market, through the messengers the Doppler has been sending to the bank. Off they go. While Dainty and Geralt search, Dandelion decides to play for the market to earn his lunch, quite literally. This proves to be a poor idea, as it attracts none other than Vespula, wielding a copper frying pan. At almost the same moment, Dainty spies himself, and a double chase begins, the trio running after the Doppler while running from Vespula. Geralt corners the Doppler in a tent, and he responds by doing what Dopplers do best.
What a hideous smile I have, Geralt thought, reaching for his sword. What a hideous face I have, and how hideously I squint. So is that what I look like? Damn.
The dialogue is so good.
The Doppler believes he is now a match for Geralt, but the Witcher knows better, pointing out what he's learned, that he preferred to knock out Dainty rather than kill him. Simply put, he's no killer of men, and the Witcher he's just copied only does it when he must. And this is not one of those times. The Doppler realizes he's been outmaneuvered and changes into Dandelion instead, and shows that he too can use what he's learned about his opposite, that he only kills intelligent beings when he must, and this is not one of those times. He tells Geralt of the plight of his people, how they thrived on the land where the city was built, what he had to do to survive, and how he means to do that now. Geralt lets him go. As Dandelion, Dudu thanks Geralt for letting him go, and they wish each other well. Expecting that he'll never see him again, Geralt is in awe as the Doppler walks away. It was one thing seeing Dudu mimic Dainty Bibervelt, but seeing his best friend copied moves him to amazement. The precision in mannerisms and speech is just unbelievable. A final parting gift. Dudu even finishes the song Dandelion had been noodling on throughout the story. It would make for a fitting ending right here, but Vespula isn't ready for this story to end just yet. We learn a new thing about Dopplers. When struck unconscious by a copper frying pan, and perhaps other metals will work, I don't know, they revert to their natural, unsettling to humans form. Now, it's pretty bad luck to be lying unconscious in a busy market if you're anyone at all, but especially when you're a creature most humans want to kill on sight. But the Witcher is awfully fast. He snags a large knitted carpet to cover Dudu with, rolls him up, and tries to play it off, claiming the man is sick and needs space. And up walks Chappelle. His intervention worked out for them last time, but a second time? Could they be so lucky? He orders the crowd to disperse, and given his reputation, they do so quickly. Chappelle is wary of Geralt, and vice versa. They realize that they have both believed the wrong thing of the other, a thing they would never believe if they knew the person they were wary of. All along, the reader is concerned for what Chappelle, given his reputation again, would do to Dudu. But also, all along, Chappelle has been concerned for what Geralt, a monster hunter by trade, would do to a Doppler, his kin. The realization begins when Chappelle calls to Dudu by name. And we were told only his close friends call him that. He tells him to turn back into Dainty. Then he confirms that he has taken the place of the real Chappelle, who died of natural causes.
What do you see in this city, Dudu, and you, Chappelle?
Had you lived on the moors, Chappelle muttered back, and eaten roots, got soaked and frozen, you'd know. We also deserve something from life, Geralt. We aren't inferior to you.
Very true. You aren't perhaps even happens. What a start to 2021, chat. Chuck, that. Very true. You aren't perhaps even
Third time's the charm.
Ready for this?
Here we go.
Very true, Geralt nodded. You aren't. Perhaps it even happens that you're better.
Chappelle sets about attempting to prove that by again using his powers for good. But Dainty, real Dainty, is ahead of the game for once here at the end. Chappelle is seemingly of a mind to suggest that Dainty adopt Dudu as his genius cousin, but Dainty has clearly had the same thought. And just like that, Dudu has a home. And Dainty's family has a being who isn't literally a cash cow, but could literally change into one, and is certainly a proverbial one. Dudu is able to return the favor to Chappelle by revealing his plans to supply the city with many eternal fires, with the added bonus of some leftover cochineal that he didn't sell to Povis, to make the fire look even redder, and, I suppose, more eternal. This is a half-foot Doppler who knows how to seize an opportunity. Speaking of, so does Dandelion. He suggests they all go celebrate these successes at the finest establishment in town, the Passiflora, at the Bibervelt's expense. Dandelion's positivity is itself a bit of an eternal flame, but the events of the day are legitimately moving, and even Geralt's mood is noticeably brightened. Even he is of a mind to spend an evening having a good time. Off they go.
What a short story. And
Ooh.
also, round of applause, Aziz, for you getting through that whole thing with all those big words. I couldn't even get through a sentence. So, we each had our bloopers there. It'll be funny for editing for you for later. But it's a really, really interesting short story. It's a short one coming in at 40 pages. We talk privately again when we do our calls every Tuesday before we do the pod. And, it grows on you the second time you read it because you're finding all those finer details and whatnot. But part of the reason I really like this one is because of the similarities to Edge of the World. We have kind of an out of place character in Dudu who's, trying to fit into society. Of course, he's not doing the best things to have a great reputation, but there is a lot of those similar kind of racism, xenophobia vibes we see, even though Novigrad is a free city. And I think, that was one of the main themes that I really liked about this. But I'd love to hear what you guys thought of it. I thought it was a fun short story, of course, not as important as some of the other ones we've recently been discussing. The next short story is going to be, have far greater weight to the things that it connects to for the future of the Witcher story. But what are your thoughts on this one, guys?
They're both drinking, so I'll talk.
Coffee time.
I like this story more every time I read it. The first time I read it on audiobook, and I had just been very emotionally invested in Shard of Ice, so I kind of missed most of what was going on, and I just, it was money terms and the word doo-doo being thrown around, and I just didn't connect to it very much. By the way, somebody please tell me if doo-doo means the same thing in Polish as it does in English. But yeah, it's a really funny, charming story, and it's kind of like, it's a really good-hearted story. Most of the people involved, almost everyone, even the guy you think is the bad guy, is good-hearted and well-intentioned, and people kind of just wanting to get by, and it all kind of ends with everybody being friends. And it's definitely not as, rich of a text as some of the other stories, but it's a really fun, light read. And from here, the book gets considerably more intense. So I think it's nice to have this little fun with economics that I think probably Andrzej Sapkowski thinks this is just like the most fun thing. Like, you can imagine how like enjoyable this is to him.
It is interesting because it has like some similarities to Edge of the World, and that there's a pub and then there's a campfire after where everybody's chilling out. Dandelion's doing his thing. Of course, Dandelion is central in this one, but this one it definitely had, you have a great timeline that you're going to talk about as far as Geralt's relationship and breakup and all of that with Yennefer, and kind of really put it, which I love, put everything in perspective as where Geralt is in his kind of grief state after breaking up with Yennefer, but we'll get to that after. Aziz, your thoughts on this fun little short story?
Totally agree. It's like the urban version of Edge of the World in a lot of ways. It builds on a lot of what we learn there, has a similar kind of, it's silly for a while, then it gets really serious, and then it has a happy ending. So yeah, structurally familiar, but I think it's cleverer, it's funnier, it's a little tighter the way it's written. Like you said, it's not as relevant to the main story, but I think like you, Michal, the more I've read it, the more I appreciate how tight it is. The cleverness and all the way things are set up other things really effectively. And there's so much mirroring. And of course, that's a fun theme to have in a story with a Doppler who is like a human mirror or a living mirror. Dainty to dainty, Geralt to Geralt, Dandelion to Dandelion. We have these like parallel intentions towards Dudu where they both think they're out to kill him, and in fact they both are trying to save him. Then we have these copies of the Eternal Fire everywhere, and then we get this quotes like when they get to the bank, Dandelion says, "I imagine the bank differently," and then Dandelion meets the banker, and the banker says, "I imagine you quite differently." And then Vivaldi at one point says, "I'm telling you how it is, and how it is what I'm telling you." Like all these like mirroring things. And then Geralt's both armpits and his jacket tear. So.
The saga of Geralt and the jacket is a special delight to read when you come back to the story, because I think it's easy to miss the first time, and then it's like, oh, he's really concerned with his new coat.
Geralt is not usually concerned with things of trivial matter like that, like fashion. So it's really funny to him to be like, oh man, like, you know, he's trying to be the best dressed, and then, you know, Dandelion usually takes the cake on that because he's, you know, he's a bard. But
he asked Dandelion, he's like, what do you think of my new jacket?
And then he rips it, dude. It's so sad. It's like, rest in peace, Geralt's jacket.
He tells him it's not up to the least. Like, you clearly don't keep up with the latest fashions.
Just a point about Geralt's jacket, though. If it's tearing in the kind of stuff that a Witcher has to do in the city, I do not have high hopes for it out in the wild.
That's a good point.
Just putting it out there.
Can we get some F's in chat for Geralt's jacket? By the way, his new jacket. You know, it's super. Like Sapkowski is always really brilliant in how he tells the story. Like, you know, we have the Eternal Flame, which is this serious thing because we'll get into the White Flame and kind of that cult part of it later on, and this is definitely tied to that. But you know, the whole Dudu copying Geralt and getting his memories and learning about Geralt's morality is really fantastic, and also like kind of just like learning about characters' true intentions. It's really interesting that we get a nice lens into that, because you know, often when Sapkowski is presenting a character, you know, we find out a lot more about them later on, like at the end of the story. We find out that what was previewed and written as their intentions wasn't their real intentions at all. And I just really loved Sapkowski kind of looking into the soul of these characters, and it's just so funny to see Dudu copy all of Geralt's moves and them, like, you know, like the Spider-Man meme where they're pointing at each other. That's kind of what I imagined in my head happening for Geralt and Dudu. But yeah, it's just a really heartfelt story and a really nice light read before something heavier. It's like you take this concept of the assimilation stuff and with the elves where it was really serious and difficult and painful to read about and serious, but here it's a whole nother level because it's like the supernatural element is turned up. Like, because elves, you know, we see assimilation with elves, we see it working sometimes, but like this, it's a whole nother level. And so the prejudice, the reactions becomes even more of a central theme. It builds on what we've already seen from other stories along the same lines. It's kind of almost maybe not a peak of that, but it rarely gets this intense. Yes.
I really like too a lot of the setup for Chappelle, how it's there's like little clever bits, like you see when you reread it, you see like the talk about his health and Vivaldi saying his personality has changed. But there's one other funny one I noticed when he's first introduced. It says the man addressed as Chappelle, blah 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 blah. It's like, oh, the man addressed as Chappelle. So like the first line indicates it's not him, but in an oblique way that you would catch.
When did you guys catch on about this? Because there is a lot of like teleporting around to like all these, you know, kind of chaotic scenarios. When were you first like, I know who Dudu's impersonating? Like,
I did not get it. I didn't figure it out. I was just reading and enjoying it and not thinking about it.
But of course, after you go through on your other time, you're like, I noticed this like little line here, and that's kind of what's brilliant about it, right?
Yeah, the second time through, it's like, okay, looking for clues. Hunting for clues. Yeah.
Chat, let us know when you found that out too, because I was like, oh, it really enlightens you when you go back and you read it over again for a second or third time, and you're like, oh man, I can't believe I missed that. So yeah, there's lots of interesting characters in this one, but we'll get to the characters and we'll focus a little bit on them, because I think we should show a little spotlight for all the good vibes they brought us amongst the chaos. But let's talk a little bit more about the themes, because there is some pretty strong themes, even though the majority of what happens in the short story doesn't seem like it's important. What were you guys thinking were the main themes of this one?
Well, we talked about prejudice a bit, and that's a good place to start. We've got a good quote here.
Yeah. You gave dwarves, halflings, gnomes, and even elves the modest possibility of assimilation. Why should I be any worse off? Why am I denied that right? What do I have to do to be able to live in this city?
Now we know Geralt having heard a line like that, we kind of know by now how he's going to react. When Dudu says, "I've been in your head and I know how you're going to react," the reader can basically say, "Yeah, me too," because this is not, we've had several short stories, and we know how Geralt handles the situation. He's not a murderer. He respects things like this. He respects privacy and people wanting to live their lives and things like that. So we knew that would work. We didn't necessarily know what would happen next, but that was a great moment, and it recalls a lot of these really strong themes that are present like throughout the whole series.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
There's a lot of like interesting, especially with the contrast to Edge of the World, like, the elves we meet there are pushed out also of kind of like of a human civilization. But they're dying. The persecution has led to the point where they are like absolutely almost eradicated. And that is similar to the plight of the Dopplers. But we also see a lot of prejudice facing the dwarves and the halflings. And Dandelion is like, "Let's go to the Passiflora," and then Dainty's like, "They only let humans in there." And Dandelion's like, "We are human." And he's like, "You."
And we got to remember that dwarves and halflings were amongst the first races to really establish the continent, right? Like they were around then, and humans more and more have acquired power and magic, and that's why we see less and less of them. So this prejudice thing is highlighting not only for the elves, but dwarves and halflings, which have experienced that as well.
Yeah, and I just really like how that's filtered through the perspective of the city. The idea of this like cultured place that still experiences like polite racism, I guess, where like Dainty's, they're not murdered, but like, and we do see more intense prejudice later, with, like signs about elves and stuff. Maybe that was before, I don't remember. Everything blurs together, but, when Dainty's would-be business partner comes up and is like, every halfling is a selfish bastard and a whore son, and the dwarves are just as bad, and you're all one tribe, and like, that's very much, because of business matters, not because like, I don't know, it's triggered by something supposedly, but it exposes what lies underneath, which I think is kind of that very like kind of modern. It's more of an
economical like racism as opposed to like a cultural thing where we see with the elves or like, like calling them vermin and stuff like that. This one is more of like looking down upon them and like a sort of classism almost, I guess.
Yeah.
We could view it like that.
Yeah, maybe economic tribalism is a good way
to
put it. Yeah, like oh, you guys only do business with yourselves. You don't, and that is what he accuses them of. And it's fun. It's Dainty is like so used to it, he ignores the insult. He's like, wait a minute, I'm realizing something now. I guess he has bigger problems to think about, but I think
that's Maybe Vivaldi.
yeah, he's like, don't worry about this guy. Chappelle, now that guy I'm worried about. You have this note here, Michal, that sometimes it might be that there are even improved versions, which I hadn't thought about. I like that a lot. I'd like to hear you expand on that. That's a great idea.
So even Geralt kind of notes that, like, he says it might even you're not like us. It might even be that you're better. And I think you can expand that into like the examples of Dopplers that we see. So Dudu is smarter than Dainty in economics. He finishes Dandelion's song that Dandelion wasn't able to, find an ending to. He can't quite be Geralt, but he also gets more about Geralt than like Geralt wants to admit. Like he cuts to the heart of like he knows exactly what Geralt is and is not willing to do. So they are kind of equal in that way, right? Because that's what Geralt confronts Dainty with, Dudu with also. And then, Doppler Chappelle, obviously we don't have anything specific to compare it to, but we do know that like he was apparently just the worst. And
it's not hard to improve on him.
So it's not just an improvement, but like it's so clever how whatever this Doppler's name is able to kind of cash in on that reputation without actually acting on it. And I think that's really clever. Although I do need to note that the poor innkeeper of the Spearblade is like tossed into the dungeons, and I really hope he's okay.
I figured they let him go. Like, he's intimidated enough, and he's not going to say anything. I don't know, but
sure.
I hope so. It's like he wouldn't, like, they're shown to be not killers. So I'm optimistic there.
But part of the point is that, like, he's using this established prejudice of the faith to protect the Dopplers, right? Because if anybody talks about Dopplers, he can crush that right away. And it's I think that's just a really brilliantly clever position to be in.
Yeah, that's a great
I'm rooting
take
for you, Mr. Innkeeper. Hope you're all right.
That's a really good take about the improvement. I definitely didn't catch that, but you just laid out like several examples, and it seems like, yeah, I think you're totally right. The finishing the song was particularly cool. That was a nice touch.
And he does it right away. He like picks up the lute and he's like just
instantly.
It.
You're right. He's like, I got it. Boom.
Yeah. And this is also, it's not called Winter, by the way, Dandelion. It's called Eternal Flame.
well, listen to the two differences. This is the first part, so there are really different perspectives in the ballad. Around your house now, white from frost, sparkles ice on pond and marsh. Your longing eyes grieve what is lost, but not can change this parting heart. So that's like a very, like, almost like negative, depressive type of ballad. And then we go like Judu. The spring will return on the road, the rain will fall, hearts will be warmed by heat of the sun. It must be thus, for fire still smolders in us all, an eternal flame hope for each one. So then so it's almost like kind of how the story starts and how the story ends. We get like a little bit of hope in the end, as opposed to like a really like bad outlook in the start. So Sapkowski always likes to kind of troll us with these foreshadowings, but it's all there in the ballad, I think.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool. So yeah, another comparison to elves real quick. The elves never really had the same choices. Dopplers never had the same choices elves had. The elves, and they have each other. That's another thing. Elves, even as they're pushed to the edge of the world, they still have each other. But Dopplers there's so few of them, and that's why this. I think it's important that we're given clues that Dainty or Dudu and Chappelle knew each other before all this. It seems like one day Chappelle became Chappelle and told Dudu, "Hey, look who I am now," or whatever. And like, wow, nice going, man. that was good luck, because of that whole point about him calling him Dudu, which is only my close friends call me that. So, and of course he recognized him. So I wonder if they have the ability to identify each other. Can they like see each other? Like there's some sort of identifying, like I can tell that you're a Doppler too. Like they can sense each other somehow. I don't know, but I suspect that's the case because there's so few of them. They may sort of stick together in a way, but that's not exactly expanded on. I'm mostly just guessing.
Michal, I was going to say, Michal, I also really like what you put in the document about wishes. That kind of, like when we were having our chat on Tuesday, really piqued my interest.
Yeah, so I'm not actually sure where this kind of fits into the story thematically, because it feels like something from an earlier, more fairy tale story, and this doesn't have a direct fairy tale analog, I don't think, that we've been able to really find. But I do find it really interesting that Dandelion, like when they all leave the inn and they're eating fritters that Dandelion has stolen, of course, because he's the worst.
He's a pastry thief, the worst kind of thief.
Yeah. Right, because he thinks he deserves it, which is the worst. But there are fish in this fountain, and Dandelion says that he's going to make a wish, and that there are 3 of them, so that they get 3 wishes. I'm not sure exactly how that works, but 1 wish each. And his wish is that someone will finish his ballad for him. Someone does. Dainty's wish is that someone will pay off his tax for him. Someone already has. And Geralt's wish is that this whole thing with the evil Chappelle and the people with the lamias that are coming into the courtyard will turn out to be a misunderstanding, which it not only is initially, it is even more because Geralt doesn't even realize that he's not actually talking to Chappelle. So it's just like this weird little minor prophecy that's like in the middle of this story. And
wait, isn't one of the wishes that the doppelganger gets hit on the head from out of nowhere?
Oh,
and
is
that happens too. Yeah, that's one of the wishes
Oh.
that someone will just thump him out. Something will fall out of the sky and hit him,
Oh
and
my
that,
god, I
and
missed
then Vespula basically does that. Yeah,
I love her character. She's hilarious.
that. She is pretty great.
she's pretty much the hidden dominator of the whole thing. She ends up being scarier than Chappelle.
She's also really funny. Like, I mean, again,
Yeah.
I hate Dandelion. I have plenty of issues with, but like the interplay at the beginning, just with Geralt being like, it is the sound of cherry preserves being thrown out a window. Must be Dandelion.
Yeah,
And the meaning of her name means wasp, which is hilarious.
Yeah.
It's really funny.
right. You can't get rid of her because, like wasps will chase you.
As opposed to bees who collect honey and are just chill.
Yeah, exactly.
Wasps are much more mean.
I'd like since we're about the point in the notes where Michal, you have your stuff about the recovery stage, which I think is a really great take, but I want to kick it off with that line you just cited about cherry preserves. We've all seen like various versions of the trope where you've got the like really sad boyfriend. It's usually a man, and from my experience watching TV or whatever, like I think of Ross on Friends when they're just like they relate everything to their ex. Like Yennefer used to throw cherry preserves too.
When something sparks a memory in what they used to share, yeah.
I was like, she would curse at me like that too.
Oh man, that is perfect. Ross is the perfect example for that.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Oh my god.
His just demeanor, his sad demeanor.
Yeah. Well, so to work off of that, I view Sword of Destiny as a very kind of deliberate arc for Geralt. And each story is kind of a different stage of his growth and his relationship with Yennefer. So the first story would be the makeup, because they've fallen out and they get back together. Second story would be the breakup. Obviously, no explanation needed. This story would be the recovery, where Geralt kind of starts at the very beginning of the story. I think it's like the 7th sentence or something. He's talking about Yennefer, and then even the song that Dandelion starts singing with the around your house, the white from frost and all that, like it recalls the shard of ice imagery. And then by the end of the story, he kind of gets over that relationship. Like his mood improves through the story, with being with his friends, and I think it's not an accident that it culminates in him like, yeah, let's go to the Passiflora.
The common trope of the boys going to the pub and having a few beers and wings. You know what I mean? Yeah. Let's get over Yennefer.
It does end that way. Yeah.
It's interesting that there's a couple of other signs. Like I think Novigrad doesn't sound like the greatest place in the world, but Geralt, like they pass by a dude who's like shitting in an alley, and like Geralt just does not have that visceral reaction to Novigrad that he does to Aitken Vale, and like, which is something we mentioned last time, that a lot of that might just be the effect that Yennefer's having on him, which is part of what you recognized. The
filter, his filter's all messed up. It's clearing up. The filter's cleaning itself. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, and then at the end, get the verse Dandelion can't finish in his ballad is about spring, and it kind of changes to that idea of hope and a fire smoldering and like things kind of lasting, that I think is thematically tied into that idea.
Yeah, because they aren't done, that's for sure. They'd certainly get back together.
Yeah. And that's why that's the last story in the book.
No one understands Geralt like Yennefer, so let's.
I thought you were going to say me. Okay.
You're next.
You understand me. You understand Nivellen quite well.
Oh God.
There we go again.
I have never
Here we go.
Just a quick note. It's fun that this coup in Povis. I didn't have anywhere to put this, so I'm just going to say it now. The coup in Povis that drives up the price of cochineal. It's actually like a fairly relevant event in the main series. The family that takes over is going to be pretty important in the main 5 novels. So just keep that in the back of your head. When we get to that point, I'll point it out again. Kind of a fun little dot to connect.
And actually, speaking of cochineal, I don't know, which I think they actually still use today.
Cochineal? I don't know.
Yeah,
I think that's beetle dye. Yeah.
Yeah, it's bug dye. Yeah,
Yeah, it's used in red colored food. I think red 40. So if you
and
look
lipstick.
at your so look at your stuff, and there's beetles in there.
Yes, I was reading about that last night. It's like, oh my goodness, that is wild.
The funny thing is, like, I've known that forever because it's a kosher thing. So like bugs aren't kosher. So anything with red 40 in it isn't kosher.
Oh.
I read that they tried to install the cactuses that they get infested with in like Australia so that the British Empire could have their own source of cochineal, but all the bugs died and the cactuses spread. So they had a cactus infestation, which was useless. Instead, the cochineal all died. So nice.
Good job, British imperialism again.
Just like how people tried to install eucalyptus trees in California and it was too dry and they all died.
Oh, whoops.
Yeah, so that's happened throughout history a lot of times. People got to understand their herb lore a little bit more, Aziz.
That's right. You got to have exactly right. You got to be like Dainty Bibber, but you got to have like farming skills. You know, you got to be from Knotgrass Meadow or whatever that's called, and have those. That's another thing I guess that comes up later is Dainty. When Dudu's running through the crowd and Geralt's thinking about why he doesn't change shape, and it's like, oh, it's because he's a halfling, and halflings are amazing at being agile and running through crowds. So he's staying in that form because it's the best form for escaping. And then we do see examples of halfling agility later in the series, which is very satisfying.
Yes. Halflings have a pretty rosy future.
They know how to take care of themselves. Yes.
So just on the cochineal and the tie into economics. Again, it's hard to kind of pin down a general overarching theme for this story, but I think that it does have to do with like investing value in things that don't appear valuable. And kind of vice versa. We have Dainty with like Dudu purchasing all of this, what he perceives as trash, and wasting all of his money, and it turns out to make him a rich halfling. And even Dudu himself, who is like in his natural form, they all like are disgusted by, becomes like a very valuable person that he. Dainty wants to have in his family. On the spiritual note, there's a really interesting contrast between like the very high value placed on the worship of the eternal flame, I think. Like to the Chappelle's, obviously it's not Chappelle speaking, but like it doesn't seem to be out of character for him to threaten anyone with horrible torture for blaspheming the eternal flame, even indirectly. And I think that's really interesting that it's kind of contrasted with the way they end up maintaining that flame, which is through these cheap materials. And it's kind of like, the value of the thing is basically what people decide it is. Like cochineal was totally worthless before, and now because of politics, people have decided that red is more valuable than blue. And that's also really interesting to me. Also,
especially in fashion, specifically red.
Yeah,
and makeup. On a dime on, right. Not just from political reasons, but that is what happened here.
Yeah.
Shall we jump into characters, guys? Because there's a pretty big, like, for those of you that watched a TV show and got into the books. Of course, we get a Doppler in season 1, and there's a pretty big change. They pretty much just make this Doppler a mercenary / villain, and it's kind of tough because you can't for them to adapt it onto TV. They're not going to be able to do all of the short stories, right? So they kind of pick and choose which ones are going to be the most impactful to kind of the connection to all the Blood of Elves stuff and time contempt and all that. So this was a little bit disappointing. I'm in agreement with Michal and Aziz here. A little bit disappointed because we don't get to see the backstory of this character and what really makes up that person, and we really only kind of get the mercantilism part of it.
Mercantilism.
Mercantilism, yeah,
it is right. We lose the tragic element. We lose a lot of the depth of their struggle. And I totally agree with you, Kyle, that, that's because this short story is kind of a standalone. It's like Michal said, it's part of Geralt's path in a sense. They were able to, it made, like if we had all sat down to predict which stories would make TV, I'm sure most of us would have guessed this would not have made it, and we'd have been right. But they still wanted to keep that element of the shapeshifter in the story. So they just did what they had to, I guess. So yeah, I don't hate it. I just wish, I wish it could have worked out a different way, but I understand.
I'm actually curious though. Can we get into like actual spoilers for that episode? Like, is that okay?
Yeah, no problem. Let's go ahead.
It's fine. Yeah, I'm pretty sure everyone's seen it.
Right. Okay. So as we've discussed, like the character who recruits the Doppler, the mimic or whatever they call him, I don't remember in the show, is also portrayed in a much more villainous way than he is in the books. True. And like, so it's an interesting contrast that they're both sort of poised as bad guys when
Kovir is also has a very different story. Like, I wouldn't say very different, but he has a more I don't want to spoil too much, but he's more of a gray character as opposed to like if we're going to use D&D terms, he's like a true neutral character as opposed to like a neutral evil.
Yeah. So I'm just sort of interested that they didn't kind of choose to take the Doppler character as a contrast to that and be like, here's evil Kovir, like forcing this sweet, like, and Geralt's so explicit, like you're a sweet simple Doppler who doesn't want to hurt anybody, like it's it's and one of the first things he does is like murder Mousak in the show.
I feel like viciously,
I think what they're going to do, and we can talk a little bit about it, is they're going to portray Nilfgaard and the White Flame and that whole
He's not Nilfgaardian.
I know, but they're displaying that as more. I think they're going to display that as way more radical in the show. I think
you think they might mash up some of this eternal flame with the White Flame, is what you were saying? Because
I think what's going to happen is when we get to some of the bigger reveals, like I don't want to say they're doing things black and white because we saw what happened with Sintra and all of that. Like we saw that, Kalantha wasn't the best queen, but I think that they're going to show Nilfgaard as more of a more true evil as opposed to like, as like things are going on the continent, more of like a Lannister Stark thing that we saw with Thrones. I think that it's more easily understandable for The Witcher. I think it'll be, they'll obviously pull book elements and show the complexity of all of people's POVs and stuff, but I think that that's where they're going with it. That's just a gut feeling.
So it's interesting. Yeah. I sort of disagree, at least in terms of like characters, because I think very much this is season 1. This is act 1. It's less important to define your villain in contrast to your heroes than it is to define your heroes in contrast to your villains when you're starting off a story. So it's more important that we get Ciri and Yennefer and Geralt, I think, arrayed against the idea of these evil Nilfgaardians. And I think that you have, once that's established, you have a lot more just flexibility in deepening the character. I mean, like, we didn't get, everybody hated Jaime Lannister until definitely it's the second or third book. I don't remember.
Great point. Yeah.
In the show.
Like I'm saying, I think people will end up liking Fringilla more because we're going to see more of her.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like we got characters like Bronn, for example, in the show, who we got. You know what I mean?
I hate Bronn.
But listen, as far as like 70% of the fandom, like most of the people didn't read the books are hardcore fans like we are. So I was talking like meta here. We got to see more of characters like Shay, even, you know what I mean? And George R. R. Martin was for that. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see like the differences. I don't think it's a bad thing that we get differences, right? Because ultimately it's bringing a shining light to The Witcher, which is awesome. But it'll be interesting to see what kind of changes they make as far as the story goes.
And the farther along, the path, I won't say what I was going to say because it's maybe spoilery, but like the farther along the path of like the evil, if you start someone here and you bring them here, like it's still an interesting story, but it's not as big of a change. And if you start someone like here off frame, evil land, and then you bring them there, it's just much more compelling of a journey. So I think I agree with you. That's my gut. Is what they're gonna do, because he's such an interesting. Like, I don't think we have any hope of seeing like a nice Doppler.
How all this conversation started is when we were chatting Tuesday night. We were talking about Geralt and Ciri's relationship, and Ciri being a teenager in season 2, and how that's going to differ from the book. So we're trying to talk about all, because we're going to talk about the show. By the way, everyone, like when the show comes back, we're going to be kind of doing episodes like talking about the episodes and all that in the season. So it's just so interesting because like it's been in the back of my mind and like all of these changes that are going to be making, because like, it's very talked talked about in the fandom. Like the Witcher fandom is another hardcore fandom, like Song of Life and Fire.
I don't envy that challenge of figuring out how to adapt all these things, but I think you're right, Michal, as far as that prediction is that they might just be trying to making a character more evil is just a way to make their turn more interesting. Because and whether or not that's specifically what happens, who knows? But one thing's for sure, Nilfgaard will have more nuance to it. It won't just be straight evil. Like that wouldn't be interesting. You know, they're not going to be like the orcs of Middle Earth, where there is some interesting backstory behind the orcs, but that's all in the past. Like there's no chance of them becoming good again. You know, not in the short term.
The Nilfgaardian POV will also expand without spoiling too much. Kahir and Fringilla, all those characters, we'll get to see more insight into why they make the decisions that they do, and some of their backstories and some of their traumas and how it affects why they are the way they are.
Yeah, they're not a monolith, so that's going to be interesting for us to explore that for sure.
Yeah, Badge just said that he's waiting for the fish soup, and I am really going to be upset if Lauren leaves out the fish soup.
We really went off there for 10 minutes, but I love when we go on our
it's important, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I do think it is an important character change as far as Dudu goes, and it's important to keep track of like why, you know, shows change things for reasons, you know, but we just don't have to agree with those reasons.
We didn't get much of all of the elves, but they were like the short amount that they did showcase in Edge of the World really showcased how they felt so negatively about the human world, right? So
given casting news, it sounds like that's going to be really boosted. There'll be a lot more of that next season.
Phil Evangel's going to have a big role in season 2. Yeah. So that'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Let's talk about, shall we chat about Vespula and the other characters and Dainty and Chappelle?
Yeah, it feels like we mostly covered them, but I'm sure we may have a few more takes. Like as far as we talked about halflings and what maybe the future of dopplers, and you guys have anything more to say about Dandelion or Geralt or Chappelle or anything like that?
All I have to say about Dandelion is that he's just like blatantly sexually assaulting this innkeeper's daughter, and like she's falling to the floor, so he'll stop touching her, and I'm just like, I don't know how to hold Andrzej Sapkowski as I believe, feminist writer, given later developments, and just like blatant, unpunished, humorously treated sexual assault. So like, I wonder,
I do too, but maybe I'm being maybe this is too optimistic of a view, but I wonder if it's something that you raised indirectly when we were talking about this episode. Where Geralt finds value, or that people like the two changelings don't have like a community. They don't have a lot of friends or a lot of people to pick from who their friends are, and it's better to have a terrible person as a friend than to have no friends at all. And if Sapkowski wants to show that, he's got to make Dandelion be terrible in ways that aren't like murderous, you know, like, right. And that's about the best worst thing is to be a woman, you know, be this kind of person he's not like a full blown violent rapist or something. That would obviously be far worse and unacceptable for Geralt. So this has to be someone that Geralt can accept without, you know, crossing these lines, and he just barely doesn't cross them, I guess. So that's my like optimistic take on this, but of course that I could be completely wrong.
Like in the books, Dandelion's bad actions are way worse. I think in the show they'll tone down in it for sure, because I
don't think he does anything objectionable in the show. I don't remember like being turned on. Like I don't think he'd be the internet's boyfriend if he.
I think they'll use it more as like comedy. That
he probably isn't going to be grabbing people. Yeah, yeah. Like I agree. Like that's like 90s humor that is
like kind of like in the way they told stories, like when you know Geralt was talking with the dude, and like he was like, oh, like he knew he hooked up with his wife, kind of more stories like in the background told from like another person's perspective. We might get him more like that.
I guess that's a great way to do it. Like he'll tell dirty jokes rather than do those things. Right? That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
And then that way we're still getting kind of the backstory of his adventures.
Yeah, and it captures the essence of the character but it tones down the roughness there.
We do have a female showrunner, so that's why I think she's going to be more.
She's already changed a lot of really good things, which is
Yeah.
So she's really plugged in. She's smart. Anyways, that's why I wanted to bring that up.
We don't agree with all of her decisions, but she is very solid. I think
Her perspective is valuable.
Yeah. Yes, very true. Yes, 100%.
Lore time. Let's jump into some lore.
Ooh, here's a good quote, Michal.
Okay. In a word, the halfling finally sighed. I've been robbed and ruined by a creature whose existence I previously didn't believe in. That's what you call bad luck. That about sums it up, the Witcher said, casting a glance at the Doppler huddled on the stool. I was also convinced that mimics had been wiped out long ago. In the past, so I've heard, plenty of them used to live in the nearby forests on the plateau. But their ability to mimic seriously worried the first settlers, and they began to hunt them. Quite effectively. Almost all of them were quickly exterminated. So Geralt knows nothing.
Yeah, right? Geralt knows nothing.
Geralt, you're bad at your job.
I wonder about that too. Like, how did they do that? Like, Dudu talks about being chased by dogs and turning into one to escape. And, like, how did they test for them? I think silver, like, I figure it had to involve silver, like probably subjecting the townsfolk to very invasive testing, like testing for witches, kind of that same kind of thing where they, like, I don't know, whatever they did to test for witches, but they would subject it to just almost any woman and a lot of men.
Or like an iron cross, the usual trope of like silver for werewolves, irons for shapeshifters.
Which sets up a brilliant scene much later in the books that I won't spoil, but I can't wait to. We're so far away from it, but it's so great, the whole undoing of this testing people for their whether they're whole or not. It's great. So
I mean, they talk about the punishment for dopplers, which involved like I think an iron bar between their knees or something, and like being wrapped in concrete or some iron filings, like. It definitely has something to do with metal, and it's not pleasant, and you would definitely not want that to happen to you.
They were like baked into a brick, basically, and then which is wild because I wonder if this is connected to. I was reading about the real world legends for changelings, and that is one thing that in ancient times would be done to changelings, like real changelings, like not real changelings, because presumably there weren't any, but people suspected of being real changelings. They would do something similar, like baking them and then making them into like, not food, but it was like putting them into an oven.
Well, look at what they did with the witches at the Salem witch trials. I mean, that was they were doing that kind of stuff thousands of years before that was happening. Like, non-believers and shit.
Yeah.
Oven,
when in doubt, fire.
Similar thing. Yeah, it's the same thing. This eternal, and that's an old belief across a lot of cultures that fire is a purifying agent.
Yeah, cleansing.
Doesn't seem that way to me.
It's eternal.
It's like the Roman version of peace, right? Destroy, kill everything, and you have peace. That's because there's nothing. That's the way fire is cleansing.
When the Vikings invaded England used to burn them alive. So they weren't Christians. So it's kind of a similar type. I mean, across all different cultures, we see the baking of people by fire, unfortunately.
Yeah. So the as far as since we started on real world stuff, I'll keep going with that for a minute here. The people were really afraid of, in ancient times, certain cultures. Certainly, it wasn't super widespread as far as I could tell, but Germanic and English and other cultures had this legend of a changeling, which was like a sick or burdensome child. And that sounds like a really awful thing to say, a burdensome child. But we're talking about in ancient times where like one more mouth to feed can literally be the difference between your whole household starving or not. So, make sure you keep the proper context and you think about what that means. And so it presented ancient families with really tough choices. Like, do we keep this child that is a burden on us? And that led to, in order for people to do awful things to their own children, they kind of have to perceive things differently. You kind of twist your own mind around and you start thinking of this child as evil. And so people had to, that's where these legends come from. That
survival of the fittest turns into cannibalizing your own. My God.
It is a lot like that. Yeah. You have to, kill off this child to let the rest of the family survive or some awful thing like that. So they would portray these evil children that culturally it developed that these children that were problematic were seen as evil. That way, it was less difficult, emotionally to deal with. If you could blame it on superstition, then you don't have to. It removes your, the burden of your own mind dealing with the fact that you have to get rid of your own child. So that is, very difficult to think about. But you could see how it applies here, because we learn that the shapeshifters were immediately, like Dopplers, like humans, like the first contact they had, they were freaked out and wanted to kill them all. So there was never any chance at any of a court or of any type. Now, if we go into more proper legends of shapeshifters, whereas changelings were more like the legend there was a fairy has replaced my real baby with its baby. That's how they would justify killing it, because they'd say, this isn't my child, this was swapped out by some fairy, they took my kid and left their own, and that's why its head is too large, or that's why it's it has its ankles are too big, or something like that, something that looks they would explain away deformities that way. But,
like Yennefer, which is interesting, because Yennefer was looked upon as very something that it could have been altered magically, even.
Great point. Yeah.
Yeah.
And she was treated with revulsion. So with more proper shape-shifting, which is what a Doppler is, they can turn into whatever they want. That is just a monstrous topic. Like, if you go into almost literally every ancient religion has shapeshifting. Their gods, like Zeus, can shapeshift. Odin can shapeshift. Like all these different Chinese deities can shapeshift, and Japanese, just you name it, pretty much everything. And like the oldest known story in the world is Gilgamesh. There's shapeshifting in Gilgamesh. Shapeshifting spirits, like sometimes there's occasionally variations on that, like where the gods, instead of gods, it's like evil spirits that can shapeshift into people, or animals that can shapeshift into people. But it's too big of a topic for us to cover here, other than just say it's a monstrous topic that has roots in almost every culture ever. So that's pretty cool.
As does Eternal Flames, right? That's very popular.
Yeah, it's fun that Sapkowski picked two of the biggest, most widespread ancient beliefs for this one, where he's usually a little more niche with some of these things, like with these fairy tale references and things like that. But this is different. This is a much broader topic. Real quick, there is almost no herb lore in this one, so it's like a 3 sentences this time. The passiflora is the passion flower. Which is, the major association with Christ and his last hours alive. So, Passion of the Christ, that's where that term kind of comes from, that movie and that thought. It's not just about that movie, of course. But and then Hawthorne is mentioned here, but we've covered Hawthorne a few times. It was actually in the first episode. So Geralt mentions it briefly, but that's pretty much it. We have lamias, which aren't herb lore, but lamias were those the little disc shield things that were whips that the Chappelle's guards had. Lamias symbolize hypocrisy, which is brilliant, because we have this church hypocrisy all over the place here. There's multiple exceptions. We pointed out hypocrisy in other places too, so I thought that was a pretty nice little under the radar theme there. And there's a little quote that goes with it that includes the hypocrisy.
In most of the countries known to Geralt, the production and possession of spiked lamias, also called Myhenian scourges, were strictly prohibited. Novigrad was no exception.
So it's a banned weapon that the temple guards are allowed to use. Okay, then. That's fair.
So we should probably talk a little bit about Eternal Flame, which is, and we'll talk about the influences of that. In our private chat, we were talking about Prometheus and what possibly all of these different fire-worshipping historical preferences that we could look at. So we're going to talk about a few of those. And Michal, this is a really awesome quote. I was talking a little bit about the possible radicalism we could see in the show, but this one is kind of focusing on a little bit of what an Eternal Flame could represent.
Do you know what the eternal fire is? A flame that never goes out, a symbol of permanence, a way leading through the gloom, a harbinger of progress, of a better tomorrow. The eternal fire, Geralt, is hope for everybody. everybody without exception. For if something exists that embraces us all, you, me, others, then that something is precisely hope.
Nice. That is so good.
So there's some darker tones. The word harbinger, which is usually in reference to apocalyptic type of events, which is interesting because the first part of the ballad talks about the white frost and winter, and then also the flame. And there's obviously this duality and polarization that we see within the story of The Witcher. So, but we'll talk a little bit about the eternal flame part of it. let's talk about.
Hold my hand.
So
feel my heart beating.
So fire was pretty much like the first thing that was worshipped? Was it like one of the first things that was worshipped by intelligent beings, at least apes?
It seems like it. Obviously, we don't know for sure because, we don't have footage or writing from back then. But it's obviously one of the major technological breakthroughs from all of human development. Without fire, we would still be, living alongside Neanderthals most likely. But we didn't know how to work it. We didn't know how to make it, right? So it was sacred because it was like if you had it, it meant life and warmth and health. And if you didn't, you were screwed. So it was you could see why they didn't ever wanted it to go out. And we still, as humans now, have these vestigial beliefs and fascination with fire because of how important it was to our long, long, long ago ancestors. And Kyle, you mentioned Prometheus. That's exactly... these myths are rooted around humans' relationship to fire in super long gone times.
It's because it all starts off with the flame being sacred to life, important to the ability to live itself. I mean, the sun, obviously. We could talk about that and talk about physics and nuclear fusion and all of that. But on a more, kind of, I guess, personal level, we kind of always try to equate our permanence with something and, with something becoming afterlife. So I think it boils down to kind of how insecure humans are in some way that we aren't permanent. It has become a deeply religious thing, but we'll talk about some of the other ones. It's pretty cool. Like Hephaestus is fire in creation is also a big thing. Like blacksmiths and that sort of thing. So that's pretty cool, Aziz.
Yeah, there's two major ways it was visualized by the ancients as far as we understand it. There are two types of fires. There's the hearth fire and the forge fire. And the hearth fire is your home fire, and that's the life and home and living one. And then that's the forge of protection and progress, where you make tools and items. So I don't fully grasp that dichotomy, but it's
probably a male-female thing also.
Oh, good point. Yeah, you're totally right, because Hephaestus and Vulcan were males, and then the goddess of the hearth for Greeks was Hestia, and for Romans it was Vesta, and those are both women. And the Vestal virgins tended the fire of Vesta, the sacred fire, which was an eternal flame. So that, I think you nailed it. Yeah.
Comes down to gender again.
So often does.
When in doubt, the answer is gender. Shout out to Amy in the chat.
Also, Greek gods like Ares and male aggression and female comfort and growth. There's a clear difference between the two of them.
Yeah, the way these things are portrayed. Yeah, totally. So there's it's the same thing with fire gods and things like that. If you look back, you find huge amounts of, there's fire traditions in almost every religion. They always have, not every religion has a fire god or whatever, but there's always connections. It's because it's such a crucial part of our own prehistory. We have a couple of cool examples here. We have some real life examples of eternal flames. It's another thing that's just a massive, massive list. I started looking this up and was like, oh my God, this is such a thing. Michal, do you want to tell us a little bit about sanctuary flames? That's one of the more well-known ones.
I actually don't. Which part of the doc are we in?
We're under man-made. I just wrote sanctuary. That's the ones that are burn in synagogues.
Oh, in synagogues. Oh, yes. Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, I wish I could tell you I knew more about the specific origins of it, but if you go into most synagogues, there will be what's called a ner tamid, which is an eternal flame that is burning all the time. And yeah, there's a couple of other different like flame things in Judaism. But that specifically, it was interesting when I was reading the story because it is such a generally lighthearted story, and they keep referencing like the eternal flame, and to me that's something like rather somber. So
Yeah.
it was like an interesting contrast.
That is something you got to give it to Sapkowski more so than any other author I can name. That he's just so good at going from serious to silly and just on a turn of a dime and doing it really well. Like when it's like, oh, that's serious, oh, that's silly, and I never seem to get confused as to which is which, and I doubt most people do either. He's just so good at that. It's hard to do that.
He's so good with tone. It's
Yeah, like a flame for me, like a representation for me. I just remember like sitting around the campfire, like roasting hot dogs or marshmallows when I'm a kid. So that's like a thing of comfort for me. But for other people, it could represent something completely different. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like wildfires, for example.
Good.
Those come back every year. Those are kind of eternal in California. I mean, like it really depends on where you are and what place you're from, and it's pretty interesting. Like all of the different kind of viewpoints of this eternal flame.
So a couple more examples from around the world. Like you said, Michal, it's part of other religions. Zoroastrian is perhaps the most prominent like fire element to it. Some people mistakenly say Zoroastrian is fire worship. It's not. It just it's a major component. Fire is a major part of the worship cycle, but it was never a thing. They didn't actually worship fire. That's a misnomer.
And that's the main influence for lore in that religion in Song of Ice and Fire.
Yes, like George took some of the things that are mistaken beliefs about Zoroastrian to build Relorism, because those things are more fantastical and interesting in that way. Christianity has plenty of stuff with fire, so does Islam. Just all these major world religions, it's fairly common. South India has several temples with flames that are apparently several centuries old, which that is just really cool. Paris has one under the Eiffel Tower in honor of World War I that's been going since 1921. St. Louis has one that's even older by 2 years. St. Louis, Missouri has one that's been going since 1919. Japan knocks them all out of the park with one at the Itsukushima Shrine that's 1,200 years old, a flame that's been burning since 800 AD. Wow. Right? That's so cool. And Japan has another awesome one that's the reverse. They started one after Fukushima, and or I think it was after Fukushima. Maybe it was after World War II. I'm blanking out on when it was started, but they're going to extinguish it when nuclear power is gone. Or when nuclear weapons are gone. That's what they're going to... So it's going to burn until there's no nukes.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, huh?
Wow.
It's also a cemetery thing. Like, I think there's the tomb of like the JFK and Robert Kennedy. There's an eternal flame there. I think there might be by like graves of unknown soldiers, sometimes eternal flames, but I could be wrong about that.
I think you're right. So those are man-made ones. Now there's a couple of cool non-man-made ones. There's some natural gas burning flames that have existed for a while. One has existed for 2,500 years in Olympus National Park in Turkey, which is apparently the source of some of the myths and legends for Mount Chimera around Bellerophon. One idea is that Bellerophon tamed this land, which was an area where goats and lions and snakes lived, and that's where the myth of the Chimera comes from. That's just a guess, not my guess, but some people that, researchers, historians think that may be where it comes from. But anyway, 2,500-year-old natural gas flame. That's wild, right? And Kyle, back to what you were saying about campfires. There's a flame that's been burning. Some hunters set a natural gas vent on fire in 1922 in New Zealand, and it has been burning ever since. And it's now a tour stop where you can go and have pancakes and tea cooked on the eternal flame.
Oh, they better have Canadian maple syrup, God damn it.
Yeah, in the alternate universe in which we're all allowed to go to New Zealand again.
Yeah, right. And there's a coal fire that's been burning in a place called Burning Mountain, Australia for 6,000 years. I don't know how they know it's been going that long, but that's what it said.
I suspect a lot of this is
guesstimated, maybe. Or...
Yeah, that's a nice word.
The Olympic flame isn't an eternal flame, right? They light it at a specific time.
I think.
Is it?
Is it eternal? Yeah, I think it is.
That one's really interesting because it represents like the spirit of competition and all of that, which is awesome.
It is pretty neat to think about a flame that's been around that long. It gives you kind of like a connection to the people who saw it first and everything. I don't know. It's pretty cool.
Way back in the day when they were shooting javelins and rocks around.
Yeah. Jordan Alexander in the chat says, eternal flame pancakes.
I wonder how good s'mores would taste from an eternal flame.
Ooh, that's a good idea. Now, yeah, set the maple syrup aside. Let's get some chocolate.
Yeah.
Hey, so Ludmilla, our friend Ludmilla from chat and our group, sent us some good takes that we want to include here. Some excellent
round of applause for Ludmilla.
Yay, Ludmilla.
We're good to go.
It starts with a quote from Vivaldi, who says this as he's meeting Dandelion and says the wrong songs.
And I know your songs. I know them. I've heard them. About Princess Vanda, who drowned in the River Duppy because no one wanted her. And about that kingfisher that fell into a privy.
Okay, so Ludmilla says in Polish, kingfisher that fell into a privy rhymes. So it just sounds funny. There's no actual story behind it, but so of course the translation it no longer rhymes. Okay.
Well, I mean, I guess you could tie it into the very last book in the series with the Fisher King, but.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's true.
It's
I wonder how you.
Yeah.
We would have to think of a different. If we wanted to make it rhyme, like what's a fish that rhymes with a type of toilet? There's so many names for toilets and so many types of birds and fish. I'm sure we could find one. What's a bird?
That's just I'm sure we can find a fish that rhymes with toilet.
There's so many words for both, right?
Is a fluke a fish?
Yes.
Yeah, I believe
the fluke that fell in the loo.
We're getting there.
Work in progress.
So then also Ludmilla tells us that the name in the river, the name of the river in the original text is Duppa. It says Duppy is a translation, sort of. She says declension, which I admit I don't know what declension means. I guess it's a translation thing. So when you remove one P, she says it's the Polish word for ass. So she drowned in the river ass. And then the kingfisher that fell into a privy says more ass stuff going on. And in Polish, W is read the same as V, so it's actually, so you read that as Princess Vanda, it would be Princess Wanda. And she says that, I'll just read what she wrote. The Eternal Flame has one very small reference to the very famous Polish legend about the daughter of Krak, who is the guy from the Dragon Legend, which we discussed in a prior episode, if I remember correctly. I guess Bounds of Reason. And her name was Wanda, and she was a very brave and beautiful woman. There was a guy named Rudiger, who was a ruler of one of the German tribes, who wanted Wanda to marry him, but she refused. So Rudiger invaded lands ruled by Wanda, and from that point, there's two different versions. One version says she led her army and defeated Rudiger, and he killed himself because of shame, and she ruled peacefully and stayed a virgin.
We can stop there.
Yeah, that version's better. The second version is Wanda didn't want the war to happen because of her, so she committed suicide by throwing herself into the river. Yeah, I like the first version better.
The Vespula River, which kind of sounds like Vespula.
Oh, you're right. I shouldn't have left that out. So good call there. And then she says Wanda became a legend and is known as the princess who didn't want the German.
Nine.
That's awesome. And that is a great segue to our final section, isn't it? Yay, funny moments.
Funniest moments.
We've already covered so many of them along the way, I think.
I'm just going to have to start with Geralt's jacket saga, man. Come on.
It's so funny. It's so funny because it's so out of character, and yet for some reason it's just like, yeah, at this point in time, I feel you. Like, yeah, him being obsessed with his jackets.
Like he's a Witcher, right? Like he's not supposed to be concerned with like things like that, like fashion or just money in general. I mean, he likes getting paid and stuff, but nothing that really requires you to go out and be styling, because Witchers get dirty often.
Yeah. And he doesn't get paid in coin in the end. He gets paid in a new jacket.
Okay, so
it's fun. It's really funny though, because like the whole like trope of the boys going out to the bar. You get dressed up to go to the bar. You want to look good in case you connect with someone and you see someone that you're attracted to, and it just kind of reminds me of that a little bit. I don't know. It's just kind of funny. Anyway, sorry.
So there's this great line when Geralt is in the market and he sees Vespula. She doesn't see him. The line is, "The customer was none other than Vespula, known to Geralt as the thrower of missiles." And how about the name of the guy who appointed Chappelle, the hierarch? His full name, Hierarch Cyrus Engelkind Hemmelfart.
Some of the names, right? Like Vivaldi.
Yeah. I guess that's maybe a nod to the composer of Vivaldi.
I assume, but
Yeah, it's not exactly a common name.
Just and like Teleco Lungrivink Litor.
Now that is a name, right? Like, jeez, where did he come up with that one?
I also love how he does, like, "If I may, cousin, Teleco Lungrivik Latort, Penstock for short, due to his close friends, and for the whole of Novigrad, a member of the large Bibervelt family, spoke up." Like, it's just, I love when Sapkowski does those, like, very specific and long-winded definitions of who people are.
I'm surprised Aziz got through the synopsis unscathed like that. You see, I just couldn't even pronounce a word just there a second ago. So it's impressive, honestly.
So let's see a couple more quotes we have here. Ludmilla dropped a quote that I liked, and so I was able to use cut and paste from her post in the group instead of having to grab it myself.
On Facebook, by the way, which you can all join and come hang out.
Yes. So this is a really good line. This is when Dainty realizes, I don't know what the hell's going on, but this dude's making me money. So whatever he wants, just keep going. Y'all want to read this one?
Yeah. Sorrel reports that everything is ready, it yelled shrilly, and asks if it should start pouring. Yes, he should, the halfling bellowed, at once. By the red beard of old Rundurin, Nami Vivaldi bellowed as soon as the gnome had shut the door. I don't understand anything. What is happening here? Pour what? Into what? I have no idea, Dainty admitted. But Vimy, the wheels of business must be oiled.
How about when Dandelion's trying to cover for him? He's like, he calls him Nutcase. He's like, yeah, he's his cousin, Nutcase Biberveld. He's normally a nice guy, but the color purple just makes him infuriated. What?
Oh, that's a really funny story.
And the story is just bonkers, really, honestly.
It's a very rude comment, but I can't help laughing at it anyway. When he's like, Dandelion says, when the messenger gnome is going back, he's like, what is that?
half of our podcast today was laughing, so
that's okay. The next one will just be crying.
Yeah. We're really going on a roller coaster, aren't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's less like this going forward and more of the sad. Yeah.
Oh yeah, the last story in this book is just a gas. It's like,
nothing but laughter. No, but it's true though. Even though it does get more, there's more dark than humor later. It's still full of humor.
Yeah,
it's kind of fitting that we start 2021 with our first podcast of the year with a story that's fun. I don't know. I think it's setting the tone for a fun year.
Good point, Kyle. Well said. Yeah, good said.
So I think is that pretty much it. Do we have any pirouettes in this one?
I did not count any pirouettes.
I didn't notice one. It's too bad because we could have had mirror pirouettes. They could have like pirouetted together, you know?
Pirouettes.
Yeah, they were funny.
Pirouettes.
Oh, pure
Wasted
wets.
opportunity.
Wow. I'm shaming you for that one.
That was well earned. That was well earned. Yeah.
That's going to do it today for the podcast surprise number 11 here on YouTube. Super excited to be back going into Sword of Destiny. And next week, not next week. My God, the next podcast surprise, we'll be talking about a little sacrifice. So that's going to be an interesting one.
Yeah.
Of course, we encourage everyone to join us, read the short story, of course, in Sword of Destiny, or to listen on audiobook.
I actually highly recommend listening to A Little Sacrifice. It's the way, man, I'm blanking on his name, Peter something, reads it is just
what is his
wonderful.
name? Peter
McKenney?
Yeah.
Or is it
Yeah. So
McKenney or just Kenny?
Peter Kenny. Peter Kenny.
I'm saying McKenney for some
But
reason.
he is Scottish, so it makes sense that the Mick would.
So yeah, like I said, if you look in the description of the video, you can find the links to Anchor, Spotify, everywhere we have the podcast surprise. Our downloadable version goes up just a little bit later, but Aziz puts a lot of hard work into that. So thank you for that.
Editing out our mistakes.
Yeah, editing out our mistakes and gaffes, but it's all in good fun. So if you're interested, of course, make sure you go check that out. And yeah, I also have the links to Michal and Aziz's social media and their content in the description of the video. But let's ask them what's up next. Michal, what's next for you?
I am, doing my thing on Twitter. I'm also with the Level 7 Access podcast. We're currently reviewing WandaVision, which is absolutely fantastic, and I highly recommend everyone get on that train. And there's obviously a lot more Marvel content on the TV side coming down the pike. What else? We have the Nice Jewish Fangirls podcast and the Vassals of Kingsgrave, which is currently doing just a ton of different things. Anything nerdy, including a Witcher reread. They just finished Baptism of Fire, so they will be heading into the final endgame soon.
Are you
now.
sort of like the queen of that discussion over there?
I actually tapped out because it was too much Witcher.
Yeah,
but I love listening.
2 Witcher podcasts would be a lot. Yeah,
I have a favorite quote from Time of Contempt that I sent in the chat. And I was like, you guys must read this and at least just say this is Michal's favorite quote.
Right on. That's cool. On my end, we're doing we're almost done with the Dance with Dragons over at History of Westeros, and then we're going to start doing the Winds of Winter chapters on our same regular Sunday schedule for Valar Aretas. And I still got my game streams going every Friday. We're playing House Manderley right now, and that's about it. Pretty much the same as usual. Just churning away. Oh, we just finished an episode on Giants, a scripted episode for History of Westeros, and that's going to be out in a few days.
With Crowley's daughter, Amanda.
Yeah, from Disputed Lands Podcast. You did a great job. We had a lot of fun working together, so I hope you all check that out.
Lots of awesome content to be checked out, everyone. 2021, it's ramping up. Like I said, there's lots of awesome stuff to check out. There's some Witcher news coming out. Filming is coming back, so we'll be doing a Witcher Wednesday next week. Of course, I'm covering WandaVision. I'm doing a podcast on Sundays with Hack's Dogma called Marveled, which has been super fun. Winter Soldier and Falcon and Loki, some of those videos will start to come out. Just the same old stuff. We're hoping that The Witcher comes back this summer, all three of us. We will be doing our podcast, of course, getting the Blood of Elves and stuff, but we'll also be covering some TV Witcher stuff. So hopefully all of you are doing well. We really, really appreciate all of you being here with us today. Like I said, if you enjoyed this, subscribe, all of that. You want to support us, you can head over to Anchor, hit that support button. But yeah, I think that's going to do it for us today. Are we going to sing? No. Okay. I'm just
No.
Do you feel my heart beating? Do you understand?
That's going to do it for us today, everyone. And we hope that you have an awesome weekend. It's not Friday. It feels like Friday, but cheers. Have a good one, everyone.